This is the Volvo EX90, a car we've waited for quite a while. It's the company's flagship electric SUV, and it's really a battery-powered alternative to the XC90, which over 2 generations has proven to be an incredibly popular car, both for the company and among families, because it's a true 7-seat SUV. Now, there's an awful lot of new technology in the EX90, so we're going to go through everything you need to know about it in this video, including design and, of course, what it's like to drive. So let's get into it. Now, the EX90's design is still unmistakably Volvo. The overall silhouette really leads on from where the XC90 was, and around the front it has a more modern interpretation of it. Obviously, being electric means there's no open grille here. You have a small amount of air intakes lower down, but these actually only open when needed, otherwise they're closed. It's all about improving the car's aerodynamics. So of course you still have the Volvo logo front and center, including a built-in front-facing camera, and real signature piece of this is the fresh interpretation of the Thor's Hammer LED daytime running lights. Now, these look very impressive, very distinctive when you see this in your rear view mirror on the road, and of course it has that extra very cool little bit of technology where you see the car almost blink when it goes from low beams to high beams. And being fully electric means there's no combustion engine under the bonnet, so instead you get an extra little bit of storage in there, and I'll show you that in a moment. Now, of course, this is a big car. It is a little bit longer and a little bit wider than the outgoing XC90, but it is slightly lower overall. It sits on these 22-inch alloy wheels. These look really, really good. They are aerodynamically optimized as well, so you'll see all these are filled in, so there's no real exposed spokes as such, and you've got things like a little Volvo name there. They look very classy, very distinctive, and of course they're all about efficiency. And efficiency and technology is really an ongoing story with the EX90. For example, you won't get a traditional key with this car. Instead, you'll be able to use your smartphone. So the car is equipped with ultra-wideband technology, meaning that as soon as you start to approach the car, it will automatically know that your key is stored on your phone, and as you walk up to it, it will unlock itself and be ready to drive as soon as you get in. And if you don't want to use your smartphone, you can also get a key card. So just like a normal RFID card that you'd have for your hotel room or your credit card, all you got to do is bring that up, tap it against the door handle, and the car will automatically unlock. And of course, those door handles, when you lock it, sit in flush, and they retract against the bodywork, and that's all about aerodynamics. And that includes the windows here as well. So you'll notice that the glass sits flush against the door frames here. And what that does is reduces the amount of wind noise or any buffeting that you're going to hear when you're driving the car, especially at higher speeds. That in turn makes it a little bit quieter on the inside. These get nice long doors here as well, so it's very easy to get in and out, and we'll show you that in just a moment. But I also want to talk about what the internals of the EX90 are like. First of all, in the floor is a 107 kilowatt hour net battery. That gives it a really good range of just over 600 kilometers in combined WLTP driving. When it comes to charging, it also has pretty fast rates, up to 250 kilowatt DC and AC at up to 11 kilowatts. And obviously that means it's going to be fine for charging at home, which is generally at about 7.2 kilowatts. And you can still utilize some of the AC, slightly faster chargers out on the street. Now, I mentioned the camera on the front, but there's also 2 cameras on each mirror. You've got one here as part of the 360 system and another rear-facing camera on this side, not to mention the built-in indicator, blind spot monitoring, heated elements, and of course the mirror itself. It's quite a nice design. It's got a frameless look here. They do work quite well, but I dread to think of how expensive it's going to have to be to replace one of these in the event of an accident. The Volvo is naturally dripping in driver assistance and safety technology, including this kind of unusual dome on top of the roof. Within that is a very advanced Lidar system, and what that will do is read the road ahead in much greater detail than what you'll get from a traditional radar, scanner or a camera-based system. Now at the moment this is only in place, it's not actually active, but in time this will become part of the more advanced automated driving features that are going to be rolled out in due course. But in the meantime, all Volvo EX90s are going to have that, and yes, certain people are going to think it should say taxi up there, but it's all part of the technology, and it's a good thing that Volvo is trying to future-proof this as best it can. At the back, much like on the front, you get that familiar Volvo lighting signature, albeit with a fresh take. So you've got this LED steps coming down on the side of the window and this C-shaped design lower down. Within that, you've got your brake lights and you've got your turn signals. Now, although this doesn't have the tow bar fitted, you can pull up to 750 kilograms unbraked and up to 2,200 kilograms braked. So this is going to be a very capable vehicle if you do need to do some towing. When it comes to storage, even though it's a 7-seater, it does still have quite a bit of space. With all 7 seats in use, you still have well over 320 litres of storage available, and you've got extra things like another storage compartment underneath here. You've got room for your charging cables, or you can take that out and put down larger items in that place. That's pretty good. But also, if you need to fold down the rear seats, you've got a button panel just here, and all you got to do is one press on each one, and those seats will electrically fold forward, and they have a nice flat level here as well. So it's very easy to get larger items in there, and if they're particularly bulky or heavy, thanks to the EX90's air suspension, you can also then lower the rear of the car at the touch of a button, and you can see there just how much lower the car will go. Much easier than if you do need to load a bigger or heavier item in. And then when you're finished, you can press the same button again and raise the car back up, or simply close the boot, and as soon as you start driving away, it will then automatically self-level back up to the optimum driving height. I mentioned that frunk earlier on, and it is a useful thing, but like most traditional bonnets, you've got to reach into the footwell, pull the latch, then come around to the front and then undo the extra clip here and then access it. Now, it is actually quite useful in terms of the overall space. You easily get your charging cables, maybe 1 or 2 small soft bags in there, and yeah, it's useful. The only other thing you're going to have in there is your washer fluid, and that's it. But it's just a little bit of a faff in terms of having to reach in and open it and do it. It would be far better if it was just on a button, as is the electric boot lid. As soon as you sit inside, you get a sense of not only the quality, but how well made and how well designed the EX90 is. There's a little bit of Scandinavian minimalism, a bit of Scandinavian chic going on. Let's start off with the seats. The XC90, its predecessor, has always had great seats, and it's true as well in the EX90. These are incredibly comfortable. They're electrically adjustable, so you've got an awful lot of adjustments, forward and back, up or down. It's all done by a single puck on the outer side of the seat. The upholstery, this is the optional wool upholstery, and it's really nice. Not only does it look great, it feels lovely. It's got a nice kind of warm sense to it, and of course it's made for sustainable materials as well, so it is that little bit better. But really, even leaving aside any environmental credentials, it just looks great, and it's very, very comfortable. Now, in terms of driving position itself, well, I mentioned how adjustable the seating position is. You can also adjust the steering wheel. You can do this via the touchscreen, so all you do is you activate it, and then you can simply move it up or down. So simply use these touch panels here, and you can move it up or down, or you can also move it in or out as well to find exactly the position you want, and then obviously save it to your driver profile. It's a similar system as well for adjusting the side mirrors. So all you got to do is left and right, you pick that on the screen, and then you use these arrows to adjust the mirror to get them exactly where you want them. As for the steering wheel itself, well, it's a nice, simple, round design. I quite like this. It's actually not very thick as well, so it feels really nice in your hand. and you've got a nice feel with this metal inlay here, and then these buttons that I mentioned. Now, a lot of modern cars have gone down having these kind of just touch sensitive buttons. These are physical buttons still, albeit with a capacitive layer. So what that means is, as soon as you start to touch them, it will actually bring up a prompt on this 8-inch display in front of you, and it will give you an idea of exactly what it's doing. So as soon as you start to press it, you'll see that these arrows will start to appear, and it just helps as an extra guide, but you do still need to physically push these in. They do have a click as well, so you do get an idea of exactly what they're doing. Everything here is quite simply laid out as well. So what you have is everything on the left side is for your driver assistance. So that's the pilot assist system in the case of this Volvo, and that's things like your adaptive cruise control, your lane keep assist. Everything is all done on the left side, including a menu display which adjusts what you see right in front of you. So you can go and have your Google Maps right in front of you, or you can then switch between different things like your lane keeping when you're driving, or have a simple speedometer traditional layout. So it's very easy to have everything there. Nice and simple. It's a very intuitive design, and all the information is always there whichever screen you're in. So you'll always see, for example, how much battery you have, your speed, and of course whether you're in reverse or park. And it will also alert you if you've got anyone who doesn't have a seatbelt done up. All your lighting controls are done on the left side, and because this is an automatic and being electric, there's no traditional transmission, everything is moved up here, so you don't have it in the center console. So right up here you have everything from engaging drive, reverse and park. And I really quite like this. Even when you select park, there's a very reassuring, nice click. Everything feels nicely tactile inside. One other thing I mentioned was the pilot assist. And when you're driving, all you have to do then is press this down one more time, and that activates it, and immediately then will start to do some assisted driving for you. Ahead of that, you do have a color head-up display as well, so you will still directly in your field of vision have turn-by-turn navigation, your speed, and a sign showing whatever the current speed limit is as well. Then onto the center console. This is a redesigned thing. Again, because you don't have a traditional drive selector or gear shifter here, you do have a little bit more space. The only physical button you'll find here is this rotary controller for your media. This will allow you to toggle left and right between tracks, or press and pause it as well, while turning it anti-clockwise or clockwise will adjust the volume. You've got a couple of cup holders here, or if you don't need them, you can just cover that all up, and you have a nice wide armrest here, so both people will be able to get their elbows on there if needs be. And underneath then you have a little bit of storage as well, so you can get some more odds and ends in there if you want to keep them out of sight. You do also have a wireless phone charger, so all you got to do is pop this on here and your device will automatically start to charge as well. Means you're always going to have your phone topped up as you're driving. I'll talk about the screen in just a moment, but I want to show you underneath here, you get this nice bit of extra storage down here. It goes right the way back as well, and it's got a little bit of kind of flock on it as well, so it's not going to be very noisy. You're not going to hear things sliding and rattling around. And ahead of that, you then have two more USB-C charge ports here as well, so if you want to plug in a device rather than just use the wireless charger, you can do that as well. Now, the screen, the display. This is quite an impressive bit of kit. It's a 14.5-inch touchscreen display done in the portrait orientation, and it just sits as if it's kind of floating here, and it does look very impressive and it's nice to use. As we've seen in other Volvos, they've now moved to a Google-based operating system. That means you've got things like Google Maps right up here. All the usual familiar things you're used to seeing with Google Maps is there. And because this is integrated into the car, if you put in your destination, it will automatically calculate how much battery you're going to have when you reach your destination. Or indeed, if you need to charge up along the way, it will know this and will calculate in a charging stop while you drive. The bottom of the display then is a two-layer setup. So right across the bottom here, what you have is a home screen. You then have this button which will bring up all of your different apps that you can have. Again, this is done through the Google Play Store, so you've got all the usual sort of things like Google, Vivaldi browser, Spotify, all the typical apps you're ever going to use. You can have all those here and set up, including then things like more detail to do with the car in terms of range and trip calculators. Everything else is there. So you have that. Then you have things like your heated seats, heated steering wheel, and temperature controls for each side, as well then as your climate setting as well. So again, all these controls are always in this one fixed place. You then have this Volvo symbol here as well of the car. This will then bring up all of the additional things that you might need to do in the car, including things like opening the glove box, which is done electronically. So you just simply pop that and it will open up. But there will also be certain features done along this screen here, one layer above, and these will change here according to what the car is doing. So right now we're stationary, and we can do things like activate the parking camera, or we can open the glove box, or defrost the windscreen. But as soon as you start to move, then these will change to a slightly different set of controls that the car thinks is what you might need. So these will always change. It will then bring up things like your one pedal driving, your performance mode, and all that as well. You've got a controller here on the left side then, in this case it's for Spotify, and you can use that as well. And of course you have a Google Assistant. You do have a hazard button here as well, but because of legislation you do need to have a physical button as well, and that is actually housed further up here on the roof as well. So if you do need to use the hazards, you can either press the touchscreen, or you can actually just use this physical button up here as well, and that's positioned alongside the SOS button as well, and physical buttons for the interior ambient lighting. So there's a lot to unpack there, I know, but it's a really good system. I've been using this for a couple of days now. It reacts really, really well. Obviously having Google Maps is a really useful thing, but the screen itself is really nice to use. Obviously you're not always going to be using it while you're driving, but it's very intuitive to use overall. The screen resolution is great. It looks really crisp. It looks really clear. And the overall operating system does actually work quite well. As well as that then, a couple of other things I quite like about it. This kind of natural open pore wood effect looks really, really nice. It contrasts really nicely with this kind of metal brightwork all the way around it. Above that, you've got your vents very kind of discreetly put in there. The air conditioning, by the way, works great in this car. And you've got a nice kind of blend of materials as well. And another little detail you might look when you go further along here, you'll see initially you might think there's a bit of a chunk gone out of it, but actually that's a little bit of a nod to the Swedish flag. And for all you audiophiles, you can get this banging Bowers & Wilkins sound system. More than 20 channels. It sounds absolutely fantastic. In the second row, there is a lot of room. So for reference, I'm 5'9", pretty average height, but I've got loads of headroom here thanks to this enormous panoramic glass roof. Really floods the cabin with light. It's really nice to use, and the fact that there's no blind here means it gives it an extra bit of room. They treat the glass with an extra layer to help reflect off some heat as well. It gives it just the slightest of tints, but you get a great view above. Both adults and kids are going to love this. Now I'm sitting behind my normal driving position, so I still have a lot of legroom here. So let's look at this. The amount of knee room I have, very easy, very comfortable here. And the seats in front are actually quite high up, so that means there's a lot of space for me that I can reach out. I can stretch my legs out underneath here very, very comfortably as well. So that's nice on a longer journey. And you've got some nets here as well, so some pockets to put some odds and ends in at the backs of the front seats. In between, you get vents here, again controllable. You've got outer heated seats as well, so you can do the outer seats if you want to have them heated. And you've got two more USB-C charge ports back here as well. A couple of other practical things. This has huge big windows, which is great, but also they're relatively low down, and that's a really good thing, especially for any little ones that might get travel sick. Being able to see out properly and have a good view will greatly reduce the risk of that happening. You've also got air vents right here, very nicely positioned, and relatively useful door bins as well, lower down. Now, one of the other things I really like about this, and I'm sure a lot of parents are really going to like about this, is you've got 3 individual seats here. So these can all move according to how you want them. For example, all you got to do is slide these forward and back. Very easy to do, and have them exactly how you want them. You can also adjust the angle of the backrest of all of these 3 seats as well. If you're not using the middle one, you do then have an armrest that pops down. You've got a pair of cup holders in there as usual. If you don't need it, you can pop them up. But one of the cool features, and if you've seen other Volvos before, you might remember, is that this middle seat also has a built-in booster seat. So all you do is unlatch it, fold it up, and it clicks into place, and you've got a built-in booster seat right away in the middle seat. Some parents are really going to like that. And the 2 outer rear seats both have easily accessible Isofix points, so they can both take a child seat as well. So that, again, very, very useful. But overall, it's really comfortable back here. These seats are very, very comfortable to sit in. We did spend a bit of time sitting in the back while we were testing out the car, and yes, it is every bit as comfortable as those front seats. Of course, one of the EX90's USPs is that this is a 7-seater. I'm going to show you what it's like in row 3. First of all, you've got a very easy slide forward of the rear seat, and then, it's not going to be graceful, but bear with me, I'm going to hop in here and show you that is what it's like to get into the back. Now, I'm going to pull this seat forward just to show you. It is right now, I've got a pretty good amount of headroom, and I'm okay when it comes to knee room, but my knees are just up against the rear seats. But these seats can slide forward, and that's kind of necessary, because the thing is, you can see here, you've got these 4 seat rails all the way on the back, and these kind of do get in your way a little bit when you're sitting in here. Now, obviously, you can slide that middle seat forward, same with the outer rear seat as well, so you can create a bit of room, but you don't have the most comfortable kind of floor here. There's a bit of an angle downwards here, again, because of how the battery is, and then you have this kind of space against your heels. But all in all, okay, you're probably not going to be in here for a very long journey, certainly as an adult, but kids will find it relatively comfortable in here. As I mentioned, I'm just about touching the roof here. Compared to the XC90, there's a little bit less headroom in here, but not by much. So you're not really compromised a great deal when you are sat back here. As I mentioned, the only thing that's a bit of a gripe is those seat rails on the floor. One other thing I'm maybe not so sure about is you do have a built-in armrest here, but it's kind of just a plastic armrest, and the tops of this doesn't really feel great. It's a little bit cheap. It's one of the few bits that feels cheap in here, but you can pop in your armrest here. There is a USB-C port built in there, and I do still get an air vent in the back, as well as lights as well, so I get a bit of ambient lighting. But really, the thing that makes it a bit more palatable back here is that panoramic glass roof, so you do still have a pretty open, airy sense when you're sitting in the back. It's also worth mentioning that both of the seats in row 3 also have Isofix points as well, so you can get 2 more child seats in there. Then all you gotta do is pop that back, and your middle seats are back in place. One other thing I'd quite like, and it's again quite useful feature, is as with in the boot, you get a button here which will automatically raise or lower those seats in row 3. So all you got to do is press them, and they will automatically recline and free up that boot space if you no longer need it. Okay, first thing first, before we go and drive away, we're all ready to go, totally quiet, but I want you to hear this, because even the indicator sound on this Volvo is just a touch of class. I don't know how well you can hear that. Maybe I'll move this closer. It is just, sometimes you get an indicator and it's a little bit annoying. This, perfect. Anyway, let's get going. So, first thing is, this is really a sizable car. Now, Volvo didn't put rear wheel steering in it. We did actually ask them, says, Was it a consideration? And they did look at doing it, but even though this thing is pushing, you know, the guts of a 5-meter vehicle, they just determined that it wasn't really, the technology, they said, wasn't quite there to the standard that they wanted for the EX90. So it doesn't have it. But if I'm honest, you don't really notice it all that much. It does still feel quite maneuverable. Now, we are in the United States here, where every road is bigger and wider, but so far it gets away with it. The driving position, initially, first thing you notice, you've got that obviously nice elevated driving position. The steering wheel, this steering wheel just feels so nice in your hand. It's just the right sort of thickness. It's not big and chunky like what you get in a BMW thing, which is, you know, modern BMWs now, it's almost hard to get your whole hand around it. But this, it just feels nice. But really the first thing when you start driving the EX90 that you notice is just how quiet this thing is on the move. Like, it's almost spookily quiet for this type of vehicle. From launch in Ireland, Volvo will only offer one specification grade with the EX90. It's called the Ultra, and really it gives you all the equipment you'll ever want. The only options that are left are things like mud flaps and a tow bar. So you do get a pretty well loaded EX90, and there's two different versions of that. They're both dual motors. This is the twin motor performance, but the base model is just called the twin motor. That gets 408 horsepower. This one, the twin motor performance, gets 517 horsepower. So there is a little bit of a bump in performance, but even the standard twin motor one has plenty of power really for what most people will probably typically need. And when you look at the price difference between them, given that there isn't any specification differences between them, well, it's quite a lot of money to spend to just get the guts of 100+ horsepower. Really, I'd be happier just to have the 408 horsepower version. Now, this twin motor performance version, when you're driving it most of the time, it's just using the front motor on the front axle, and then as and when more performance is needed, it starts to bring in the motor on the rear axle. And you do have a performance button, as it were, on the bottom of the touchscreen. So you just press that and it will give you then all that power all at once. Now, if I'm honest, even without that being active, there's plenty of power there. But you do notice the roll-on difference when you have performance activated. It is definitely much more of a jerk like that than just the normal roll-on surge of power. Either way, you get boatloads of torque in the EX90. So, to be honest, most of the time you're probably going to live without having that performance activated. After all, this is a family SUV and a big SUV. It doesn't really encourage you to want to drive quickly. Sure, it's nice to have that sudden burst of power for whatever reason that you might need it, such as a quick overtake or to get out of a situation that you're not comfortable with, but generally this is much more of a car that's about traveling in comfort, refinement, and, well, quietness, as I've mentioned, because even at 50 miles an hour here, this thing is so quiet. It's easily a match for your high-end Range Rover. In fact, really, there's not a lot of cars that I've been in that are as quiet as this, with wheels this size. These are 22-inch wheels. Everything is just so well suppressed in terms of noise. You don't get any road noise coming through. Obviously, it helps having a big battery there, but even like wind noise on the side, as I mentioned, the way that glass is set up and designed, and the door frames, it all works really, really well. This is a car that you just feel calm driving it. You don't really want to drive this thing hard and fast. It doesn't really encourage you to do it. It's much more about just, like, you kind of effortlessly wafting along. And waft is what you do in this. All of the EX90s get a adaptive air suspension set up as standard, And within that, you get two settings. You can go into the menu and you can change it between soft and firm. Very simple, very easy to do. Okay, you've got to go through a couple of menus to get to that. In soft, it is really, really nice. It just it's got a nice kind of slow pace, soaks everything up quite nicely. And obviously then you can change it and go into firm. Now, if I'm honest, the firm setting is probably a little bit too firm for most normal roads. Obviously, we don't get really nice smooth roads like we have here in the United States back at home, but we were on some coarser roads and actually it soaked it up really well. You do notice it though, as soon as you swipe that across into firm, it immediately stiffens up a little bit more and you kind of get a little bit of suspension patter. It gets a little bit busier. It's definitely, you can notice it that it's firmed up. In fact, you can almost hear it in the back of the cabin. If it was me, I would just leave it in the soft mode, especially if you're doing lower speed stuff. Maybe you're driving around towns and cities where you're going to have more different surfaces and brakes and all that kind of stuff in the tarmac. It's definitely better that way. But interestingly, on the highways here in the United States, where you get a lot of expansion joints and it's a concrete finish, and it's not really that nice. In fact, it's quite a jarring setup normally. We actually found that switching it to firm at the higher speed gave it a slightly better ride. At higher speed, it was more composed, seemed to deal with things a lot better. So again, you might want to change it according to how and where you're going to be driving. But for the most part, in urban settings, around towns, in cities, perhaps where a lot of people are going to drive an EX90, the soft setting is just peachy. The steering also gets a similar setup to the suspension in terms of being able to go between soft and firm. Now, the difference isn't quite as pronounced in this. In the soft setting, it does feel quite nice. It's light, but it's not overly light. You don't feel disconnected from what it's doing. In fact, there's quite a nice progressive feel when you turn into corners, for example, or into bends. You know, you feel exactly what the front end is doing, which is good. It communicates with you. Toggling across to firm doesn't make a massive difference. Yes, you feel a little bit more weight. You've got to put a tiny amount more effort into it, but it remains quite nuanced. There's only a little bit of difference between the two versions. And if I'm honest, it's fine. Even if you do want to drive a little bit more spiritedly, it's fine to leave the steering in a soft setting. It's not going to take away from the driving experience. The other system that's very well judged in the Volvo is the one pedal driving function, and this has a couple of different settings. So you've got the automatic mode, which does a very good job. It chooses how and when is the best time to deploy in terms of regenerating energy, recuperating energy back into the battery by slowing the vehicle down. It's generally quite predictable when it'll do it, certainly if you're coming up towards slower moving vehicles, things like that. You do also have an off button, or a coast button basically, and when you activate that, it's quite impressive at just how long and how well the Volvo will freewheel, even on pretty flat surfaces. And I guess if you do that, that's going to contribute to the overall efficiency, because you can kind of do a lift and coast style driving and you're not going to be using anywhere near as much energy as if you're using the motors all the time. Then there is the one pedal drive, which obviously in cities and in towns and in traffic, it is quite useful. As soon as you start to lift off, it really does start to harvest energy and it slows the car down quite a bit. Now, that's nothing new. It does do it quite well. Some people might find it almost a little bit too strong. After a couple of days of driving, you will just get the hang of it and you'll know exactly how much you need to lift off. But as soon as your foot starts to come off the accelerator, it will start to, you do really feel the car being kind of pulled back, as it were, as it slows. And obviously that will add even more energy back into the battery. So look, you have a choice. This, once you're driving, is one of the three little kind of toggle buttons, as I mentioned, that are always on display at the bottom of the touchscreen. So it's very easy. You can just press it and turn it off. And by just doing so, I immediately felt the Volvo start to almost accelerate just as we were coming down that hill there, and it starts to freewheel. So it is pretty good. Now, energy consumption is one other thing that we really need to touch on, because officially Volvo quotes around 21 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers in a combined WLTP cycle according to its tech specs. We did better than that. Now, yesterday we did a really long day of driving. We had all sorts, from highways to really hilly ascents and obviously descents, and we did some stuff around the city and through some of the different areas all around here, and it did bang on 20 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. And we did also have the aircon going the whole time because it was pretty hot. It was almost touching 40 degrees at some point, so we had the aircon on all day, and it managed exactly 20 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. That's pretty respectable for something this size with two people in it during a whole day driving. A lot of that driving also gave us an opportunity to try Volvo's pilot assist, and it couldn't be easier to activate. Once you're driving along, all you've got to do is press down the drive one more time and it immediately activates. And you've got a steering wheel button here, and you press that and that will toggle between ACC and pilot assist. It does a really good job. There's a lot of these systems out there now. This is not a self-driving system. We just want to be really, really clear about that. Although this has a lot of technology, some of which isn't yet active in terms of the Lidar on the roof, for example, this still works really, really well. Now, you've got to have your hand on the steering wheel all the time, but it does do a very good job in terms of keeping you really well centered in the lane, both on clearly marked lanes and actually on less well marked lanes. It still did a very good job of detecting it and keeping it in the center of the lane. And obviously then as you go through bends, it does a pretty good job as well of navigating those. So you feel the steering just start to move. Obviously you're always going to be holding onto the steering wheel, but it's very good. It also keeps a really good safe distance to the cars in front as well. So as traffic starts to slow, or during that ebb and flow of rush hour traffic, it does a great job of keeping it bang on a nice safe distance from the vehicle in front. But it's impressive that even when you start to accelerate hard, add more speed, this thing still sounds, it's so quiet inside. And normally having a car that quiet can expose some other failings, build quality, for example. Yet this thing is really not a squeak or a rattle during all the time we've been driving this thing. Even the air conditioning is actually fairly quiet. It's in the low setting now, but it's such a faint noise that you don't even notice it. The only thing I can sometimes hear is you can occasionally hear a little bit of actuation with the brake pedal itself. That's it. That's the level of quietness that this now has. And that said, there are some things that minor gripe, I would say, in terms of what it's like to drive. Now, you may notice glorious sunshine here on the west coast of the United States, but that has caused one or two, well, kind of slightly minor things. For example, the really well crafted Bowers & Wilkins speaker here on top of the dashboard, all that reflects quite a lot in the windscreen, so you do just sort of notice there. Maybe it's not going to be as pronounced on a very cloudy day closer to what we have back home in Ireland, but still, it's just kind of always there. At the same time, this side section here between my steering wheel and the door, there's some bright work and this lovely bright wood finish, but that's actually reflecting quite a lot in my side window, and that in turn is kind of slightly, I don't want to say obscuring my rear view mirror, but it's just adding a little extra layer of distraction. It's not the end of the world, but still, it's just one of those little things. Again, maybe it's the kind of thing that if you're owning one and you're living with it for a long time, might start to bug you. But that said, the mirrors themselves, they're actually pretty good. They've got a really good view on both sides, actually, once you get them set up exactly where you want. And rearward visibility is very, very good. You've got a nice big rear window, and if you don't have people sitting there in the rearmost seats, because they are a little bit narrower, you can drop down the headrests as well, so they can be folded and out of your line of sight, so they're not going to be blocking it. Either way, you still do get a really good 360 camera system as well, and a reversing camera, and it does that cool thing of you can twirl the car around by using your finger and, you know, give you this virtual fly around of the car. Anyway, pretty good system. All that works really, really well. Obviously, we want to spend a lot more time to really get under the skin of this car, but as an initial first drive, this really makes a very strong, very positive first impression. It's clear that Volvo has pulled out all the stops with this car. It's a hugely important car for the company, and it wants to get it right. It will face a growing number of competitors as well. You've already got things like the Kia EV9, Mercedes EQS SUV, and that is the kind of company that this car is keeping. It's a bit more premium, more so than the Kia. The Kia is a very good car after all, but this definitely feels, in terms of interior design, quality, drivability, it feels much more like that traditional premium quality. Volvo really has come up in the world. This is a car that genuinely, and I mean genuinely, this is a car you need to consider if you're looking at buying a Range Rover, and I don't mean a Range Rover Sport, I mean the proper Range Rover. It's that kind of quality. Volvo's done a stupendously good job, I think, with this car. It's easily one of the best electric SUVs out there. In fact, this is a car you would want to own, not just because it's an electric SUV, you would just want to own it because of how good it is. The bonus, it's got 7 seats, it's got all the tech in the world, it's safe as houses, and it's also got tons of performance if you want it. Really, this is an incredibly well-rounded vehicle. Bravo, Volvo, bravo. So that's our first drive of the Volvo EX90 in this twin performance version. It is a very impressive electric SUV. In fact, it's a very impressive SUV in general. The quality inside is phenomenal. It's super, super quiet inside, Range Rover levels of quiet. And that's really the sort of car that this is going to be knocking on the door of. It is not a cheap car. You're looking at upwards of €118,000 in Ireland, and even more if you want this twin model performance. But as hard as it is to say, this does almost go a very long way towards justifying that price tag. It is very much more luxury than premium in terms of both how it is inside and also how it's designed. More importantly, it does seem to be quite an efficient EV as well, so it will get very close to what that claimed driving range is. And as I mentioned when we were out in the drive, it was actually pretty efficient, averaging around 20 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers over a whole variety of different driving. Of course, the Volvo will always have its fans, but this is definitely a car that, if you're considering any of the normal legacy luxury brands such as Mercedes, Audi, BMW, and even Range Rover, as I mentioned, you really ought to be considering this, because it is a really great car, and it is one of those few vehicles that is a true 7-seat SUV. If you want to know more about this car, do visit our website. It's CompleteCar.ie. You'll find it linked in the description below, and it's a great resource for finding your next new car, as well as keeping up with all the latest car news. And we'd also love to know what you think about this EX90, so please do get involved in the comments below and tell us what you think. We love reading them, and they're actually really useful for other viewers as well, so please do take the time to drop in a comment below. Thanks for watching.